The interesting part is when I was leaving Yahoo, a senior vice president there pulled me aside, and he told me that I was making a huge mistake, that Facebook wasn't going to go anywhere, and um, I decided to follow my gut.
For our second tech track, I'm talking with Girish today, who is a mentor who I've known for several years now. Girish is a 10-year Facebook veteran who was with the company as it grew from around 400 people to more than 40,000 people. So, among the many, many things he did at Facebook, he helped start the Facebook London office, which now has thousands of people. He led the company wide new hire onboarding program called Bootcamp. And he also managed several teams across multiple stacks and platforms. Girish left Facebook in 2019, and he now leads infrastructure engineering at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is an organization created by Priscilla Chan and Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg to advance human potential and promote equality. So thank you, Girish, for joining us. We did work together for quite a while, about 2.5 years. But then in 2019, like I mentioned in the intro, you actually left Facebook to join CZI, the Chan
Yep,
Zuckerberg Initiative. And so maybe we could start there. Can you talk
sure.
about what is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and what do you do there?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned in your intro, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative was started by Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg. And the way they started this organization is really after their birth of their first child, Max. So they decided that Max should have a, same future or better future than what they had. So they decided to contribute 99% of their fortune, their wealth, to the initiative, and they continue to do so. So it's a philanthropic organization, and it really encompasses a wide variety of um, areas that we cover. The three main initiatives are education, science, and justice and opportunity, and each of those initiatives have really ambitious goals. So, for example, the science initiative, one of the goals they have is to cure or manage all diseases by the end of the century.
Hmm.
And so we have about 80 years to go figure this out. And obviously, we at the initiative don't hire doctors or we don't have labs and those types of things. What we do is we help other organizations through giving money and also through building software. So about one third of the company is really a tech startup. It's a fascinating organization because it's a mix of tech as well as philanthropy. And what I do there is I lead the infrastructure engineering team, which really cuts across all these three initiatives and really helps teams across the board. So we have software teams in each initiative, and it helps these teams uh, minimize reinventing the wheel by creating a set of common platforms, tooling, and practices that we can put in place to really further their goals and their products quicker. So getting started faster and scaling better.
I want to talk about how did you make that decision? How did you think about the different options? You probably had tons of options, right, after leaving Facebook. How did you decide on CZI in particular?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I didn't, obviously I do get approached by other companies um, to, join them, but I actually didn't look anywhere else. I
Hmm.
picked CGI for a very specific purpose. When I joined Facebook when it was very small, less than 500 employees. And later on, when I left, it was in the tens of thousands, closer to, 40 plus thousand employees. And for me, you know, I think, it's a great company, but the job I was doing there and the role I had, uh, it just felt like a small part of this large company, whereas I wanted to do something with a little bit more leverage across the company, having an impact on the whole company. So that's one of the reasons I went for a smaller firm. The other thing is, I feel that I got pretty lucky in my life, joining Facebook so early and just, having good fortune, that I wanted my next job to be on the philanthropic side. I wanted to give back. And given my skill set of building large engineering teams, it's not really, I can't really walk into a nonprofit and say, okay, guys, let's go build a software engineering team.
Mm.
There's not that many philanthropic institutions that are intersection of technology and philanthropy. So CZI just fit the bill really well there. Um, it's that perfect mixture, and it felt like the right spot for me to be. And so I approached them and I said, "Hey, I'd like to interview." Um, it's fascinating because a lot of people think that CZI is a part of Facebook just because Mark and Priscilla uh, run it, and that's not true at all. I had to quit my job at Facebook, leave all that stuff behind, and then go to CZI, interview, and get a brand new offer with a different set of benefits and a
Yeah.
different pay and all those things.
I'm really interested in your journey at Facebook.
Sure.
And I think people forget that, Facebook is a huge company now. It obviously wasn't that way for forever. It actually grew very, very quickly. So 2008, you interview at Facebook, you end up joining. Can you describe the landscape for us? Paint the picture for us of who are the competitors? What were you doing at the time? You were at Yahoo, I think. Talk
Yep.
about what that decision was like.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So Yahoo, again, I had the same feeling of being a small part of a large company. Even though I did work on tools and I interacted with the leadership quite a bit, I wanted something a little bit smaller where I could have a lot more impact. And so when I made the decision to look around, I was looking at startups and smaller companies, and Facebook really stood out as where my friends that I really respected were going. So I
Mm.
decided to interview with them, and when I did, my entire team interviewed me, and I just really uh, respected the interviewers, and I kind of got really attracted to the team
And
itself.
what team was that, by the way?
Uh,
Like, what was it
I
called back then?
It was called technical operations back then. So it was a team that uh, built infrastructure at Facebook. A lot of the we you know we monitored servers, we monitored the Facebook site, and you know responded to incidents and things like that. And the interesting part is when I was leaving Yahoo, a senior vice president there pulled me aside, and he told me that I was making a huge mistake, that Facebook wasn't going to go anywhere. And um, I decided to follow my gut. Like the company Facebook that I was talking to seemed to have really smart people who were very passionate about what they were doing. And they seemed to have that right attitude of, like, this is a product I want to work on. This is a product I want to build. And if you remember back in 2008, Facebook was up until then very restricted. It was only open to some businesses, like big companies, and mostly colleges, universities actually. And uh, but the way the Facebook product was being built, it really enabled people to connect to each other, and that was the most attractive part for me, was just being able to talk to my well my college friends who are now distributed all over the country. And I had a Facebook account back, I think, in 2006, so I knew the product pretty well, and I was just fascinated by the company.
It sounds like you were really impressed with the engineers in that interview process. Was it primarily the technical acumen that you just thought that the Facebook engineering team was way better than the engineering team at MySpace or Orca? Or was it like that along with product direction, along with design skill? Like what exactly did you think made Facebook so much better than the other
No,
competitors?
well, they were judging me, so I couldn't judge their technical skills. So that was
Hmm.
not one of the reasons. It was, you know, during the interview, you are entering the company just as much as they're interviewing you, right? You want to know, how do you fit in? Like, can you work with these people 8, 12, I don't know how many hours a day
Yeah.
that you need to, and uh, you want to get a sense of how this team is going to be. And when I was interviewing with them, the way they conducted the interview, the process of the interview, the candidate experience, all kind of plays into uh, my decision on picking that company. It was a the team that interviewed me. I got to ask them questions and really try to figure out if these are the folks that I could work with day in and day out. And the great part is, even to this day, I'm friends with most of them, and I still catch up with them. And I would work with them again anytime.
That's a really interesting point. So you have this very compressed period, a couple hours to assess if these are people that you want to work with day in, day out for, in your case, 10 years or more. So what advice do you have for quickly vetting or assessing if you would want to work with people in an interview or outside of interview?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is very compressed, but I do think you can rely on your gut to get a fairly good sense of how that company is going to be. Uh, I've interviewed at other places where I've been less than impressed with the teams there that I just walked away from. So definitely, I would suggest that your audience trust their gut when they're selecting their next job.
Okay, are there particular questions that help you like give your gut that direction, or is it just like you kind of gauge the conversation high level and make a decision?
In general, I think it's high level. I would ask questions such as, you know, I think it really depends on how big the company is. It's a situation based question. It's really hard for a person coming out of college to really assess that without having worked anywhere before. But uh, for them, I think a good question might be just to see how the interviewers like their jobs. Like it's a very simple question of like, what do you do that's in your day to day that you like a lot, that's fun, and see what kind of answers you get, and you will see how stressed out they are and
Yeah.
um, how much they enjoy their work. And like what you want to do is you want to get up in the morning and be excited to go to work and not dread that alarm going off and you having to roll out of bed and drag yourself around. Like that's
Yeah.
not the position you want to be in.
Yeah, what I've heard is I think that's super helpful, asking people what they love about their job. The opposite is also really valuable, right? And what I've done a lot is, what do you hate about your job? What do you dislike the most? And then that's also very illuminating to hear,
Yeah.
what do people not like, and can you live with that fact?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that would bring out is how transparent they are. You know,
Mm,
uh, you want transparency in your team. You want to be able to trust them, and you want them to be able to show you the good and the bad, rather than kind of shield you from the bad before you get there and switch it on you.
makes sense. I have one more question before we dive into your actual experience at Facebook.
Sure.
Um, Even starting in '08, I think from the very beginning of Facebook, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's always been this kind of Mark Zuckerberg at the center of the company. And that often gets critiqued in Silicon Valley, how we have maybe one founder who is basically a god in the company. And I think that was obvious in '08, and it's still very much the case today in 2020. So did that weigh on you at all? How did you think about, Mark Zuckerberg having so much control of Facebook in '08 and even now versus joining a company which might be more egalitarian? I don't know if that's the right word, but more kind of evenly distributed power.
Yeah, I, you know, I didn't get a chance to meet Mark during my interview process. I met him on at my first week, but ever since ever since the start, I really believed in just kind of Mark's perspective, right? And how he sees his product play out. Uh, since the beginning, he all he wanted to do was connect people. And if you think about Facebook in 2008, uh, we weren't as commercialized. Mark wasn't, you know, the marketing person that leads to a big company. Mark hired a really good uh, support structure underneath him. So starting from Sheryl Sandberg and Shrep, Mike, who runs the engineering team, Chris Crocs, who ran, developed the product.
Yeah, so Chris, I think,
Um,
joined in '06, right? He was super
right,
early. And then
right.
Sheryl Sandberg, the COO, and Mike Schroepfer, the CTO, sounds like they joined a little bit after you.
Yep.
Wow, so you
So,
were super early.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I remember Cheryl joining and the announcement going through. And, you know, right after, well, a couple months after Cheryl joined, you could start seeing uh, the influence that she was having through the company. So it's definitely not a one person, who's God at the company. It's really interesting because if you've worked at the company, but you can also see it in our public Q&As and things that uh, people hold Mark accountable for different things. He's not allowed to get away with things. People ask him very hard questions, and uh, inside the company, I don't see that same persona that I see in the press or I see, elsewhere, including the movies. So definitely in the media, Mark is painted a different light than I feel the company has internalized for itself.
Can we talk about now your actual tenure at Facebook? And I want to partition it into a couple of different segments. One is your pre-London time, which is 2008 to 2012. Then you spent a few years in London, and then you came back and you did a couple other teams in 2014 up until 2019, right?
Yep.
So I think '08 to 2012, that was like hyper growth, Facebook taking over the world, very positive attention on
Yep.
Facebook in the US at least. So can you
Yep.
talk about that period in particular and what you learned or any good stories you can share?
Yeah, plenty. I Yeah, when I joined Facebook, um, it was very scrappy of a company. Like engineers, we had experienced engineers and we had engineers just out of college. And the great thing about a Facebook engineering team and the engineering culture is we don't um, we give everyone kind of the opportunity to prove themselves out and to present ideas. We have these things called hackathons that generate a lot of ideas from anyone in the company and bring them forward. And a lot of our products, uh, even now probably were created through hackathons. Like if you kind of look back, the chat, the like button, newsfeed, all of these things were small projects that started in hackathon that kind of blossomed into the product we know today. And when I was, you know, during those years, I was the primary release engineer for Facebook. So I helped build the tooling that shipped the site every day. And anytime the site went down, I I was one of the people on call. So I remember many times, the team calling me, going, "Hey guys, or hey Garish, the site is down. Can you help? What do we do?" And you analyze the situation and you figure out, is this really risking pushing the site? Because anytime you change anything on such a massive scale,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what else you're going to break.
And real quick, can we just briefly talk about what is release engineering? Because I think a lot of people know software engineering, and there's
Yeah,
interesting dynamic between software engineers who write the code to build different features, and that code basically gets thrown over a wall or goes through some process, and then the release engineer has the responsibility now to get that out to the millions or even billions of people who might use that feature or that code. So can you talk
yeah.
about that dynamic and what exactly does a release engineer do?
Yeah, so release engineering has definitely changed in the last probably couple decades. It has evolved. So back when you had desktop software, you would have these really long what they call release cycles. So when software versions get updated. So if you want to think of your operating system, for example, is one good example of that. And even to this day, you don't get updates to your operating system every day. You get them
Mm.
once in a while. And if it's a security fix, you get it right away. But for major updates, they wait a year or two. Um, Release engineering at a company like Facebook is much more frequent. Today, they release continuously throughout the day, every day, 24 hours a day. But back in 2008, 2009, we released every day. And the interesting thing about the Facebook engineering culture is, like you mentioned, in many places, engineers end up writing code and throwing it over the wall. At Facebook, that was not the case.
Hmm.
Engineers had to shepherd their change all the way through the release process. So every day, my job was, well, I automated a lot of this stuff out. So I made, bots, and these are just automated systems that account for how engineers are checking their code and things like that. And so engineers would come in and say, "Hey, I have a set of changes that I would like to release to the world. Uh, robot, can you help me?" And they submitted the change. The release engineer would look at all the changes and see if there's any particularly risky ones that we might not want to ship that day, um, based on the product that is touching and things like that. And then we ended up selecting the ones that we did ship, and most of the time we shipped them all, and would call on the engineers to make sure they checked it. So there's a process that you go through where you push this change out to a few dozen servers and have engineers go test it themselves and make sure it works, either run their test scripts or just visually check things and make sure everything is fine. And then you slowly release it to the world.
Hmm.
The interesting
And by
thing
the way,
about,
we're talking only about releasing the web version of Facebook, right? Like back then,
yeah,
everyone today uses the Android or iOS app for Facebook. There was
yes,
no app back then, right? So
right.
that's a little bit different, right? You're talking about releasing a website versus releasing a
Yeah.
mobile
So
app.
back until about 2011, smartphones weren't a big thing,
Yeah,
right?
that's wild to think
And
about how quickly that changes.
right, and up until then, we mainly talked about releasing on the web platform. To this day, I think the web's, when I talk about releases going out continuously, I am talking about the website, which is still heavily used, and also it is the backing of the Android app,
Hmm.
right? So your Android app has to connect to something, and it's connecting to the website using APIs and all of those things. So those changes are still uh, just as risky, because you if you push an API change that's a breaking change, you are going to break those billions of customers.
I'm curious, how did people think about the growth of the company? So I imagine back then, right now in Silicon Valley, most large companies have a very structured performance review cycle. Every 6 months, you get an evaluation. Back
Yep.
then, I don't think there was anything like that. So how did
Yeah.
you manage your career growth, and how did the engineering team think about, I'm going to climb up the IC ladder and continue being an engineer versus becoming a manager? How did those discussions happen back then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I joined, obviously we didn't have any performance reviews or anything like that. I didn't join for that, right? I didn't join thinking, okay, I'm going to go become an engineering manager or
Yeah.
do these things. I joined, like I mentioned, because of the interesting product and the interesting things they were building, and the impact I could have, the experience I could bring to it, and the experience I would have. So I was thinking much more around the lines of like, what can I learn more of? So when that happened, I think the company went through this growth period right around when they were about a couple hundred engineers, where when Mike Shefford came in, he noticed that what we were doing is we were promoting really good engineers into a management role. Promoting because we don't do that anymore. So and what ended up happening is these engineers who were really good at writing code and shipping product ended up having to manage people that they some people were good at it, and they did well, but a lot of folks struggled at this because we didn't really have a formal training of here's how to be a good manager, here's how to respond to people's questions, and here's how to grow people's careers, here's how to think about career growth. They just went, okay, we need managers, let's promote this high performing engineer into a management role. uh, Soon after Mike joined, what he did was he created this track system where we leveled engineers based on experience as also the role they played. So the higher the impact of your role, the higher the level you would have. and that dictated your salary and other things. And he also created a level of management alongside, and it was a parallel track. It's not something that uh, you get promoted into, you transition into it. So when he came in and did that, I think that really shifted the way the company grew and the way the company thought about management. And that led to a lot of different changes within the company, including a lot more training for managers and bringing on kind of that skill set that didn't exist before.
Can you tell us what wisdom you have about interviewing at Facebook, or just more broadly interviewing in general?
Yeah, I can give you a brief history of what I did at Facebook in terms of recruiting. I probably started recruiting for Facebook very heavily in 2009. And by 2010 or so, I started doing international recruiting trips. Um, and my primary area that I went to go recruit at was in India. So I was familiar with the culture, and it was pretty easy, and it gave me an excuse to go see my grandma. So I ended up doing about 2 trips a year every year to India, whether it was to give technical talks. I gave a few talks at IITs and other universities there, and also to industry candidates, and also recruiting. It's really interesting hiring internationally, uh, including in India, because I do think there's a cultural difference when it comes to uh, recruiting folks from there. And uh, based on my experience, I could compensate for that. And in India, I felt that it was very prominent, where um, the lower engineers were being told exactly what to go do.
Hmm.
Right? You would, when we interview folks out of the industry where they have a few years experience under their belt, we're really starting to look for independence. Like, can you take a project? Can you break it down into tasks? Can you go ship this thing or feature or whatever it is on your own? Right? And then the next level there is, can you do it with a team? Can you delegate the work that you have to other people and bring them along and
Hmm.
deliver something as a team? And in India, I started noticing that there was a trend where people would do poorly at this part of the interview, where we would look for independence in their current work. And I gave a talk in India at Flipkart about this a little bit as well. And I hope the culture has changed. I haven't checked up on it, but I think Flipkart in India is one of those companies that has adopted this new way of thinking, where they want to give more independence to the individual engineer. And definitely, when you're straight out of college, you're going to need help. You know, you need a good mentor. You need someone to tell you kind of how to do things. But soon after that, after a year or two, the expectation is like you're much more independent.
Yeah, Girish, this has been really illuminating for me, being able to kind of hear about your unique journey. You're one of the few people I know who has been at Facebook for so long. And I think the work you're doing at CZI is really incredible. And I think that the fact that you're chose to spend your time and your talent at a place like CZI is pretty really impressive. What else do you want to share before we wrap up?
I was watching your interview with Igor the other day, and I think he had really good advice that I almost want to echo, which was like, you know, for your audience who are looking for their next career change or looking for a career, really find something that drives them, that they're passionate about. Because I see so many people um, kind of just going after either the name brand of the company, or the title, and maybe even the paycheck, but they don't really think about what it would be like for them, what would make them happy, and what they could learn from it, right? Like, so shifting that conversation a little bit to, you know, can I, am I going to be a person who's going to just get the job done and get out of there, and that's my role? or am I going to be going into work and looking forward to work and, really be excited about it? And I think that not only makes you a better employee, but actually helps you grow your career faster.
Hmm.
Because the more passionate you are, the more invested you are, the better your work quality will just be.
I love that. If people want to learn more about your journey or maybe have the chance to connect with you, Girish, where could they do that?
Sure. I'm happily accepting messages on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, just send me a message and I'll try to respond.
Perfect. I'll leave a link to your LinkedIn in the description for the video. So if anyone wants to follow up on that, they have that chance. Thanks again, Girish. I think this is super helpful for me and I think helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was great talking to you again.